So we're going to use tomorrow's presentation, aren't we? Yeah, B2. Okay. Again, just bear with me, everybody. I'm a bit disorganized. Yeah.
You don't use that computer because it cut out 3 times.
Okay.
Yeah, pull up you have a HDMI?
Oh yeah, I can just go through to right, there we go. But hopefully I think people here can get the chat up. Okay, I hope everybody can hear me. Andy, perhaps you can go into the chat and say if you can hear me if I speak like this. Some people emerging. Andy, oh yeah, I can see you, Andy. Thumbs up if you can hear me. Yeah, that's great. Right, we're off. Perfect. We can see that. So welcome everybody. This is an open meeting, so it was going to be sort of just AV pariahs, but we thought why not invite interesting people to come along. So Chloe's here from TikTok, Anton's here from Keneal. So we thought we might as well just co-create because this is something new. And this is really about our proposal, which we've been talking amongst the technology providers who are officially part of the EU consent non-profit, which is Verify My, Yoti and AgeChecked. Upcom, who were the designers of the first version of EU consent, have left that role now. Come on in, John. You're in the right place, I hope. And yeah, so they've moved away. So but it's a proposal that we'd like the whole industry to have a look at and to consider as to whether this is something that the industry might find a useful way forward. And it's what I'm christening the Age Aware app. I've been trying to rechristen EU consent as Age Aware for a long time, and people keep telling me I can't. So we'll remain the EU consent, but we're going to have an Age Aware app. So I'm chipping away at the branding on that basis. What is EU Consent 2.0? So in the first phase of EU Consent, we managed to roll out in 18 months, 3 years ago, an ability to go onto one website, a dummy website, prove your age, and then visit 2 or 3 other websites in different countries with different laws applying around the ages required for the different websites, and to miraculously not have to reprove your age because you were referred back to the original age verification provider. We learned a lot. We had 2,000 users. We had a lot of interviews with children and parents, and we had our academics involved in that. We delivered in line with the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and I think by all accounts it's a pretty successful first attempt. But it was a first attempt, and what's happened since then is the world has moved on. We have seen regulators, and some of you will have heard from the AEPD just now, and I hope many of you also heard from Antoine earlier from Keneal. Regulators have been putting their minds to this and coming up with their own approaches. And of course, our customers as an industry are interested in some of these alternative approaches. So ALO in particular are advocating very strongly for a device-based approach, as they call it. I mean, that can mean any number of things, but they're arguing for, I guess, anybody but them to do the age verification, but they want a device-based approach. And so in planning phase 2 of the project, which we're sort of halfway through now, but obviously we've been doing a lot of talking and engaging in the first half of the project, we wanted to come up with a solution that maybe could adopt some of those principles and concepts, but be something that would work in a commercial sense. And often one of the flaws in the academic approaches to coming up with new ideas is that we couldn't figure out how you would have a sustainable commercial market. I mean, obviously the biggest problem is if something is perfectly anonymous, then you don't know who to send an invoice to for the service that you provided in checking their age. And that's been the fundamental problem that we've been trying to wrestle with. But generally in this phase of the project, we want to update the technology, sort out the commercial arrangements if you are reusing somebody else's check. We need to think about liability, because if we're going to do this with real websites and something goes wrong, you know, and they come to you as their provider, but you've actually used a check from somebody else and it was somebody else who got it wrong, you know, how is that going to flow through? So we need to have some conversations around that. We want to update the standards, obviously, because they were drafted in phase one, go back to the principles that we applied in EU consent phase one to make sure that anything we do now still is within those principles, and do more sort of stakeholder engagement. So that was what we sort of set out to do. And so today we're just going to focus on the first bullet there, which is around updating the technology. And this week, as with everybody, we're on 2.0, because you've got to have a 2.0 in tech. So welcome to EU Consent 2.0, which is the Age-Aware app. So we want to maintain, obviously, the momentum that we built on that project, which I think has very wide recognition. It's quoted as far away as Australia. They're arguing over whether they should have a trial of age verification, just like EU consent, in Parliament there. So we had good visibility of what we did. I think this sort of repeats the gaps, and it mentions here obviously that we haven't therefore tried to address some of these new concepts from Arcom, CNIL, or AEPD. And so this is the answer in a nutshell. And the way this works is I'm totally non-technical. It has been explained to me by incredibly clever technical people. I have then tried to put it into a diagram, and I will now try and explain it back to you. This process should mean that it proves I've understood it, or it should show me to be particularly stupid, and Alistair will step in and tell me where I've gone wrong. So in this model here, we have on the right-hand side our relying parties in the yellow block, which is currently got some beautiful people in, but we'll just move them out of the way. So the relying parties, so call them an adult website or TikTok or whoever you need. And on the left-hand side, we've got age verification providers. Just look at, for now, at the originating issuer. That's the age verification provider in our model. And then what we have in the middle is the user who has an EU consent or an age-aware app. And the app is connected to an anonymizing service. So in this world, and then sitting above it is the role that EU consent plays. But just to go through in sort of more detail, effectively what happens is you choose an age verification provider. So you say you're trying to access an adult website, and it is working with Yoti. And so it refers you to Yoti and says, we're age restricted, you need to do a check with Yoti. You go to Yoti and you can choose from any of their methods, and perhaps you choose facial age estimation. And Yoti can now give you an age token. And in order to use that token, you just download a very thin app onto your device. It'll work on any kind of device. Obviously, the way the app is built is different for different devices because they have different operating systems and so on. But essentially, it's a very thin app which just hosts these tokens. And you might acquire several tokens from going to different websites who use different age verification providers. So you'll have a number of tokens. In that case, the first case, though, you've got the one token from Yoti. The adult website can see that token, but it comes to it via this anonymizing service. So there's no way that the adult site will know which user that token relates to. And equally, there's no way you can track where that token was used in terms of which site was visited by that user. So that meets the double blind. I'm not going to try and explain how anonymizing service works. I'm going to leave that to Alistair in a second. Now, the tokens themselves have I've put these little chocolate thing here. They have a wrapper, and then they have an inner core. And the wrapper has the sort of the metadata you need in order to make the system work. So what level of assurance is this token? So is it going to be a good enough token for the purpose that you've got? How much does the age verification provider charge for that token? Because we don't want to get involved in pricing as a central body. We want you still to set your own prices. So you can see those things, or the app can see those things to work out whether it has a token that is fit for purpose for that particular use case, the right level of assurance, and a token that the relying party is willing to work with. So in the first use, the site user goes to site A, site A user loads the app onto the user's device, and so the app then shows site A's contracted issuers. I don't think I've read the slide, so therefore I'm not actually delivering it very well. Why don't I hand over to Alistair at this point?
Okay, where do we get?
Start at the top.
Okay, so this is the first use. The user will go to, let's say it's an app site. The app is loaded onto that page, onto that device, I should say, by the relying party pushes that, but it's the issuer that's given the relying party the ability to do that. The app will pop up and show a selection of ABP providers in order that you can go through. Perfect. Go through and do a verification. Now that could just be the one provider. If you're contracted, you just say, I just want to show mine, or I might actually go, I don't mind whether you use me. You could also use Yoti. You can use whoever you want to. The user then will go through a standard verification that we all know about. Everyone has their own slightly different way, but effectively verified. But the token is then on the device, and then they'll go through as approved. In a normal session, with the difference between sort of a single provider and this particular model is that there's now a device. There's now a progressive web app on the device. It can be re-pinged to see whether there's a token there or not. As part of that process, as Ian mentioned, when the token is sent to a relying party, that is literally it's a dumb token. That's literally just you've done a check. This is proof that you've done a check. It's effectively a thumbs up, a signed thumbs up. And there's after it goes through the anonymizer, there's a tally that's created. That tally will say this issuer provided a token to this relying party. And you can also have, it was this referring issuer that did it originally. So effectively, say I had the contract with the site A, but Yoti very kindly did created the token for me. The tally will say, actually, Yoti's done the work, done the hard work. They need to be recompensed. I get as a referrer, I get a little bit of money for basically making that deal happen. And we know the relying party, so we know who's going to be billed for that. That's not transactional. There's no link to the actual transaction. It's literally just a count. Those get totted up by the tally service that is managed by the digital equivalent of Switzerland. Currently, we've got it as a sort of EU consent operation, and how we actually formulate that, I think, is between us to decide best way of creating that Switzerland.
Can you explain how the anonymizer bit works?
No, I cannot. I could ask somebody smarter than me.
Ben,
So the anonymizer essentially.
could you come to the front because then they can hear you at home?
So the anonymizer service itself, it basically strips out any identifying information for a request that's sent via the app to the relying party. So that includes things like user agent, IP address. So literally the only thing that it has is the token. The tally happens the exit of that anonymizing service. So we're sure, obviously, there's no possibility of any information going through from the app to the tally service. That's it, really.
So I would call that whole process a privacy enhancing technology because that's what it is. So it's a pet, and you're effectively providing a zero knowledge proof as well.
In terms of the mechanism that's used to do a proof, it's entirely up for discussion in terms of how that could happen. But there is facility within this app to provide for things like ZKPs and all the other different mechanisms that you might want to use as a form of transmitting a proof anonymously.
And so one other thing which is kind of fun to look at is what happens when this is working globally. We've got 5 million relying parties because there's 5 million porn sites out there, plus probably 30 million other sites that are checking age for digital, digital minimum ages and things like that. And there might be 1,000 age verification providers. So what we also want to avoid is you needing to have a contract with 5 million potential customers. So I think at the moment, the thinking is the easiest thing is to say there's a default price, right? And it's $1 a check, for want of a better number. And if you don't have a relationship in place with the age verification provider, then you will be paying $1. So when a user comes to your site, you'll see if they've got a token, and if you can find a token that is good enough for accessing adult content, you'll use that token, and you will end up being told at the end of the month that you owe whichever provider $1. Now, of course, all the big sites are probably going to want to do deals and get volume discounts, and so they will still be able to do that, and they will be able to have the logic built in to say, I would prefer to use age checks because I've done a deal with Alistair and he's making checks available to me for 5 cents rather than $1. So if there's an age check one, use that first. But I've also got a fairly good deal with Yoti. I've got 7 cents. So if I can't find an age check, then find me a Yoti. And obviously we don't need to get into how that logic works, but it is possible to have that. And also you could set it up such that your rack price, your advertised price, your default price is less than $1. So you might say, I don't have any clients of my own, but I'm going to go for a really low general price. And I'm going to say, I'll do a 12-cent check. And then whenever people can't find a token from somebody they've already got a preferable price with, then they might say, oh, I'll choose the cheapest. So one of the pieces of public information in the wrapper rather than in the core will be what price is it to use that check. So that allows us to run a open and competitive market without having to be sort of communist, which was the original proposal. And if you remember, it's what we went through in the first phase of EU consent of saying we will have a set EU consent price for a check, which always sent shivers down the back of my neck. So it still allows us to have the market decide what the pricing is. It still also allows relying parties to choose between providers. One of the other great problems of anonymity is you don't know the quality of the service you're getting. So you could end up relying on a token that you're not very happy with. So it might be that we are happy to certify as EU consent members of this ecosystem, anybody, but you may take a view you don't want to work with people who are based in Russia. And so you would want to exclude and have a sort of an exclude list. So you can still do that in this method. But none of those functionalities have at any point eroded the anonymity of the user and the untrackability of the token. And even I think the tallying service is not in a position to be able to track what any of the users can do. No. So there's also down the bottom the concept of an orchestration scheme, again, outside the role of what we do at the center, because this should be only that which has to be done at the center is done at the center. But you could agree between a few providers that you're going to actually just have a single commercial scheme, which is responsible for collecting all the fees and distributing them out based on information it gets from the tallying service about volumes. So you could, if you were willing to sort of trust an orchestration service with your pricing information, and again, that could be sensitive, but you might find a way, and I think, Ono, you've got some clever ideas on how that can be done, which perhaps we'll come to in a second. There's a way actually of even arranging all that pricing without disclosing to one another what your prices are, which is a step of technology way beyond my understanding. But so that's another feature of this, which means then one invoice going to each relying party, which could then feed the fees back to all of the issuers. So we won't go into the next level of detail just yet, but I thought I'd just pause for breath and see if anybody has any questions after Alistair says something else.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that this model doesn't dictate what the commercial model is going to be. So we've got while Ian was explaining, okay, it could work like this, we can still move forward with the ability to make decisions based on what do those wrappers look like, what's the logic we want to apply to those wrappers.
I think, Ian, also this basically is interoperability, not universal acceptance.
Yeah, interoperability, yes.
Hopefully, as a user, the network's wide, and I'll be able to use a token or a couple of tokens online. One of those will get me into lots of sites, but if I've only got a token from somebody who thinks they can afford to charge premium prices, some reliant parties may say, I'm not accepting that. I'd rather force you to do a one-time only, check, and hope you do it when you want to get over to my site. It might be frustrating about that, but effectively the token you've got is expensive token. That probably means, that happens too often. Pricing will adjust because you're less down your end user who's confidently size.
Ian, it's quite hard at home to hear.
Yes, I know.
in
I'm
the
just
room.
trying to address that particular issue,
Thank you.
which involves me crawling under a table. And then as people speak, I'm going to bring the computer to them.
The one is modern technology.
Hopefully that will work better. So, Julie, let me bring you the.
Thank you. So I had a couple of questions. So you mentioned the consumer interface. Is that something that's basically still to be defined what that would actually look like? And I know, Paco, you mentioned earlier how that might fit with reusable wallets such as the IDAS. Is there anything on that we could? Yeah. Is there an answer to number one? Is if the consumer
So at the moment, none of this is set in stone at all. But we do have sort of straw man, so we can actually say that this is currently what a sort of a POC looks like. But that's literally everything's what we're proposing is this framework rather than any sort of it looks like this. This is the model. This is etc. So absolutely. On the other question about the IDAS,
Well, let's have it articulated.
Well, the question, I guess, does this fit into a wider framework like the IDAS 2 the wallet? And if you look at the similarities between the architecture defined by IDAS and this, it's very similar, right? You could think about this as an extended attribute system for age verification. So you need a trust registry, you need the triangle of issuer, verification, and wallet. So it will fit in nicely into that IDAS 2 future. Question is, do you need to have an IDAS wallet to be able to prove this? Or is there a chance to do this even earlier than that?
sorry, is there a chance to do this with this even earlier? It's gonna be some type of IDAS wallets to attraction. Yes, yes.
I think it can be.
We will come to that in what I will do later on. I'll give you like a sort of practical but also more detailed outcome of what this means. And one of the things it means, it will have a layer that is in IDAS but not specified as a different layer. And before getting too cryptical, I rather like to explain when I sort of talk you through the next phase of this, because this is like the general idea. I want to take you down like step by step, what does it mean and how does it work? And then there will hopefully be an answer. If not, we talk about it. So
Okay,
yeah,
we will come to that, but let's just deal with the big picture. Answer that one.
Yes. Thank you very much. So so from my point of view, it's very much the second one. I think the IDAS is taking a fair old while, and I don't think we should wait for it. I think we should, we can observe where it's going and make sure that we'll be able to be compatible with it. But I'd rather crack on.
And my understanding of the IDAS wallet as well is it's got a high security level high. So actually the process of using it and of sharing something from it is probably going to involve human interaction, maybe a biometric password or a PIN number or something in order to release it back, giving consent, all those things. But this is supposed to be happening all the time as you move around the internet. People quickly checking, have you got a token? Can I check if you're old enough to come onto my site? Are you over 13? Are you in the age range 5 to 7? Because I want to give an age appropriate, experience to 5 to 7 year olds. So, which is very different from a sort of a highly secure EIDAS. I'm sure, I have a feeling, maybe one day, but not in my lifetime, we'll have super smart wallets that have intelligent functionality and can do all of this stuff. Anyway, but that's not what we're solving for today, because that's a long way off.
I just two things. One was a sort of technical one.
which is about the token. Like, how long does it sort of last? How long does it stay on the device for? Does the user just go around collecting like infinite tokens? And secondly, like I raised this in a different session earlier on that you were in, but like providers sometimes want to know the age, like because it's the categories of settings that we have, like default settings for 13 to 15 or 16, 17. And so if we only know that they're under 14, we don't know when they turn and graduate into the higher setting, and we can change the settings as they evolve sort of through the teenage years. And so I just wondered why that's set the way that it is.
Good question.
Yeah. So firstly, on the how long the tokens last, the standard for how the tokens, the token standard will be decided through the IEEE consent project. So it's not decided by the technology. So that's a sort of an open discussion. To your point about age range, and I think you raised that with the Spanish model. A lot of the Spanish principles are observed with this, but when it comes to age range, this can do age range because you can actually there's no reason why you can't can't interrogate the token to find through zero knowledge proof to find out, are you over 14, are you under 25, etc. So,
but it can equally give you the exact birth date if you want it to.
If we allow it
If we allow it.
Yeah,
So
because I'm not sure quite where this. I understand the Spanish regulated position is different, but like, why is there such an aversion to knowing the date of birth?
I think it's the use case that they've come up with. They always think, oh well, you're over 14, so you can now watch older stuff, and now you can watch older stuff. But we do young people's cinema passes, for example, 18 to 25. So you need to be able to do an age range. I think it's a question. What was presented was the adult solution. It's 18 plus. It's all about proving you're an adult, and therefore I think the use case didn't require a top range.
Yeah. So if you apply the GDPR principle of data minimization, then the only thing you need to know for accessing pornography is, are you over 18?
Yeah, that's
right. If we're applying data minimization to your use case, actually you're saying we need to know more than that, and therefore it is legitimate for you to know more than that. Whether you need the exact date or you can do a month, a month and a year, or
you don't know when they do turn into a new age.
Yes.
What you could do is basically you got the information.
Hold on.
You got the information in the token, but it's not necessarily shared with you. But if you would ask, like, give me an alert on the moment that this person turns 13, 18, whatever, that could be with user consent, could be done. Because the information probably is there, but it's not automatically shared. So it's all a question of business rules that we apply between each other. So it's not that it's not there, but if you don't really need to know it all the time, like, no, not yet, not yet, oh, this is the day, but you just only need to know the day, then the only thing you need to do is send a request when you get an alert, like this is a good time to send a request, because the user has to consent, yeah, you can do that. And then you do the formal request, you say, yeah, you can know, and then you hear, yeah, 18 today.
Yeah.
So it's just a question of business rules, right?
This is a time of like sign up. Like at what point in the user journey is this sort of that sign up, or when they're trying to access? I'm thinking of social media, particularly like so sign up being an obvious potential place, but also maybe trying to access a higher risk feature that might be for older users. But like it's just the content approach that the Spanish regulators set out, APD, is a more tricky one when we try and think, because like is each piece of content has to have, and then every time the token, like every time they try and access a different piece of content, like that feels like sort of enormous.
I think typically you'll do the minimum amount of age verification you need to do until somebody wants to do something else, which requires a more detailed level of age verification or a higher level of assurance. On the other question you asked is how long do the tokens last? We would expect that a token with the highest level of assurance, because you're about to buy a knife, would maybe last a day or an hour, whereas access to adult content, we might be happy to say, it will last for 3 months before perhaps you have to re-authenticate to prove that it's still you using that device. You didn't give that phone to your kid or something, and you forgot to switch this off, and so he's inherited your tokens. So after 3 months, you'd have to check that it's the right person using the phone. So you've got that flexibility in the period of time that it would work. Of course, as the relying party, you've now done a check on August the 1st, and to some extent, it's then up to you if you choose to check again,
Or the regulator.
or the regulator may set that, or we'll try and do it in standards actually. And the benchmarking standard, the ISO, gives us that opportunity to try and set some global norms so that hopefully everybody does it the same way.
Yes, on that point, we know that very few regulators have got to the maturity point of considering how long a token would last. Whereas if you ask for the Germans, they're very much at the far end of the spectrum of thinking of sort of, hours. But in certain specific use cases, say for adult content, maybe thinking that it's, from 10 at night till 4 in the morning or something like that. If they can see that it's a shared device, it might be different than if they could see that it wasn't a shared device. So again, what are other signals that somebody might have? But to the point of
access TikTok at 13, you kind of want it to last a bit long.
So it depends whether they think that whether that's proportionate, or whether they think, is this something that could have been gamed by a 6-year-old? So actually we want to check in 6 months later if there's been collusion. So if you think back to the instance when there was a journalist in the UK, that a journalist and a parent collude to, I think it was Access OnlyFans, the regulator didn't think it was proportionate to require 3 subsequent checks. But this is the sort of thing that I think over the next period, people might review and think, when do we require a reauthentication? And we know we're not getting any younger, but they might think if there's a higher risk of circumvention in certain age groups, that they might require reauthentication at junctures.
I think it's really important. We often use the data minimizing examples that the token can be as anonymous as possible, and it's over 13 or over 18 or an age range. But we must also respect that if an individual gets an age verification done, which includes their date of birth, and they then want their token to have that date of birth, they're still basically making a choice there. And if they then want to go to TikTok, and they're going to have to fill in a form possibly with some information, providing date of birth, if I want to do that, particularly if the rest of it's all anonymized, is something we should allow in the system. And it may be a regulator demands sometimes a date of birth. So tokens may not have date of birth in them. Often they won't, because regulators often say we only want over 18. But we shouldn't be uncommercial about if an individual wants a token with a date of birth in it. That's their choice, and it can be shared without lots of other identification information. A date of birth alone is not that risky.
It's not.
It's proportionate.
And just to remind everyone, we're setting out a concept here. Oh, there's a question which comes online in a second. We're setting out a concept here rather than, we haven't really done all the detailed thinking, but we wanted to make sure everybody's on board with the general approach. But go ahead.
And I had a question on the anonymizing service and the tallying service, because I think it may affect to this proposed architecture. Just thinking of one issuer which may go rogue and say, look, I want my credential to say that it's being used and consumed by millions of reliant parties. So I'm going to tell the tallying service that that's the case. So how much thought has been given to this? Maybe the architecture needs to be modified so the accounting can be closed by the reliant party to verify that actually matches together to some degree, right? Because otherwise you can say, this issuer, I want the money, so it's been.
I think we have an answer for that, but let's come over here for the answer.
I'll answer that one. So essentially, the request comes from the relying party. The app itself sends that proof through the anonymizing service, and it's only after it's gone through, so the relying party would have received it, that it does the tally. So can I just clarify exactly, just to make sure, does that cover that concern?
Yeah, so who controls the anonymizing service? Is that the governance framework, or is that the wallet of the user, or is part of the party who's in control of that? Because that opens the threat back, right? To obviously.
So how it's been framed within this is that it forms part of a service linked to the application itself.
So obviously, it's a really good question about who do we trust in the process? As a room full of age verification providers, beg your pardon to the relying party in the room, but we're saying we're not trusting the relying parties to tell us how often they've used our checks. We're going to record that, but we're recording that in such a way that it doesn't breach the anonymity because it's tapped into the anonymizing service. Now, a couple of other things I didn't say earlier, Murray, sorry, I haven't forgotten you. A couple of things I didn't say earlier. In terms of what's contestable in this, what could in future be competitive rather than run by the central infrastructure? The red area is plug and play. So you could, in the same way as we have MasterCard and Visa and Amex all offering payment networks, you could take out that one and put in a different one. But those two come as a pair because the technology has to pair the two together. So that's contestable. And the orchestration scheme is contestable as well. So you could set up a separate orchestration scheme if you wanted. So we will, as part of this project, nurture those things to get it up and running. But the concept would be that that is not there forever, and that if people later want to come in and compete, as long as they meet the standards set by EU consent and they provide the same degree of privacy enhancing technology and so on, then somebody else can come in and do it. The other thing I didn't also mention is signatures. So obviously there's a certification authority in here, which means that the tokens are going to be signed. And obviously you can only sign a token if you've been approved by the certification authority. So there's the same concept of a trust framework, and we will be auditing people who are part of this ecosystem. So there will be some people who are trying to cheat, including the suppliers of the tallying of the anonymizing service. You would be auditing them to, and of course, I imagine the relying parties will know how many checks they've done in a quarter. They won't know who did them, but they should know. So they will be able to go, hang on, I'm being charged for 5 times as many checks as I think I did. Somebody's on the fiddle, and that would raise a flag pretty
I'm
quick.
just thinking, because given the scale of the project, I was talking about millions of reliant parties, thousands of issues. The reliant party is gonna say, no, we're doing less checks. The issues agree, no, we're doing more checks. So what are the controls that need to be?
So I think effectively you can do a balance at the end of the quarter and say, I know I received this number of tokens and did this number of checks. I'm being charged for this number of checks. So you have to trust it's going in the right direction. So the distribution you can't audit because only the tallying service knows the overall numbers, but everything should balance at the end of the term. Yes, I'm going to just let Murray ask his question and then we'll come to you. Murray?
Thank you. I think it's already been mostly answered, but the question was really around presumably there'll be a race to the commercial pressures will mean that there's a race to the bottom in terms of quality and number of checks. I.e., there'll be issues out there that want to do the minimum possible in order to perform a check. There'll be the relying parties who want to do the minimum possible number of checks. How do we envisage policing that? And I assume the answer is through both the ISO standard and regulation, but I just wanted to pose that question specifically.
I think the question is there'll be a race to the bottom in how often we do checks. Is that broadly it? And
yeah. So how do we ensure the quality of the checks, basically, given the commercial pressures push it down?
So everybody will be doing checking to a standard, and they'll need to be independently audited and certified to join our trust framework, which was the criteria for joining the first phase of EU consent and would be part of any interoperable solution. Hence why we hopefully are going to get some international standards, that we could then use as across the industry. But yeah,
that would be good indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Honor is going to take us to the next level. So hopefully everybody's following so far.
Can I plug
This
in?
is where I won't know what's going on.
Can I plug in to use the screen?
Yeah,
Okay.
by all means. So
Yeah.
let me plug you into here.
And it will be extremely low-tech presentation. It will be in Word format, no graphics there. So just for the techies among us, why would you bother with all the graphics? There's even one slight mistake that I'll come back to, because it was 3 o'clock at night when I thought this is the moment to write it down. So everybody who creates knows it's always the most inappropriate moment that it comes to you. Like, you go to the door like, shit, this is the moment. So this is a moment of clarity, which normally means you either enter a cult or you exit a cult.
EU consent?
Yeah, it's in the consent folder, and then it's the Word one with the no fancy stuff.
Oh, it's Word.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
Word.
sorry, I was.
Yeah, it's low tech. It's Internet 0.0. That's when I was born.
AVP and the Word one.
It'll be, you can send the sluice.
Yeah.
No signal. Otherwise, it just talk you all through to it because I have a backup report. Yeah, this is the low tech version of it all.
So I just have to share it with everybody at home, but we
Yep.
carry on.
Okay, basically, I try to put it in steps, and the steps all the time with the considerations that are sort of linked to the steps. So the first step, of course, is the AVP issuer issues an AVP token. That is the starting point always. Simple, nothing going on. Now it comes the interesting part. The token is stored in an independent non-commercial database. I work with those, but it's not the one which we should use. It's just a suggestion. And the reason is it's a user vault system. What happens then? First, it's a utility because it means it levels the AV playing field. Everybody is using the same utility, which means there is, secondly, no trust needed. It's a vault system that can be monitored by all because it's open source. So you can see what's happening. Third one is you don't have any AVP liabilities. User provides informed explicit consent, so that's covered. But also the token data are stored in the user vault, not in the AVP database. So even if there's leakage, it's the user who's leaking, not you. And the last one is commercial services are applied within the vault. So all the competitors are not taking data out, but everybody's doing it in the vault, which means that you have no leakage, no sharing between AVPs or with other parties. Basically, you have one little black box where everything happens, which is monitored by all. If you do that, you have a user layer of data, which is non-commercial. It's just a storage place. And on top of that, you do your own magic. And within the user space, you do your own logic, your own algorithms, your own powers of whatever you want to achieve. So basically, you do three services within the vault. One, you do a zero knowledge proof contingent on user consent. So the moment the user said yes, what you do is you unwrap an AV token to provide a yes/no type of answer. And the reason you do that is that you don't reveal underlying evidence. You don't use anything, only metadata that are required. It's basically in line with what CNIL says. You have to have an independent place where this is happening, and you anonymize it all. And then the only thing you say is yes, over 18, no, over 18, or yes, this date of birth, if that's what is being asked. We don't care what's being asked. Question is there. If the user says, I want to answer this question, the wrapper, or in this case, zero proof service, will just provide the answer based on the evidence in the token. Second thing is, there is an AVP issuer selection mechanism. So if somebody says, I want to use, I want to know your age, or I want to know your age range, then there is a mechanism that says, oh, I have a contract with Yoti, we should use Yoti, or I want the cheapest one, or the one closest in my region, or a guy who has a track record of 100%, whatever. There are business rules you can apply. The third one is a billing mechanism, which is completely separate, which only says, like, if this is being done, then a bill will be sent out. And of course, not one by one, but on the both. If you have that in place, then you have a selection and billing mechanism that are under oversight, for instance, of EU consent. So everybody is looking at it like, is this what we want? And checks upon it. But you can do the zero knowledge proof contingency on base of every individual AVP. So you can say, no, we don't going to share our magic. This is our magic, how to unwrap whatever we do. We don't want to share it with anybody. We do it in the black box ourselves, but we are responsible for the algorithms that are there. Or you can say, no, let's make it EU consent common thing, a standard. I think it will start first off with the AVP specific ones. And if trust grows and everything works, we might think like, it would be good to have a standard. But that's later on. Let's first baby steps and if it works. So nobody has to really share anything which is cringeworthy, let's say. So if you have that, then step 3 comes, relying party request AV proof. Okay. And there is then a situation where a person requests access to a product or a service, which is the normal standard thing. Step 4, the person says yes, provides their consent, which means by any law, this is legal, because on the GDPR, you can reveal about yourself anything you want. I can't just reveal it about you. That's all what the GDPR says. So basically what it says is consent is stored in an overview for the user, so they can see like, I did this, I did that, and it's all revocable, of course, or at least when it's no contract or if provided by law that you need to have it. The log will also be there, but of course, if there is a judicial case, the log has to be clarified by the user, like, you know, you have access as a judge or wherever you are, a prosecutor. If you have that, you have consent provided, and it's in the store. The second one, last one is then the issuer chooses an AVP by means of the choosing service, and you get a zero knowledge proof answer, and it's billed. Basically, it's a very simple thing. We basically said we're gonna make. I always use the metaphor. The Russian mafia had Prague, where they didn't shoot. All the children were at school in Prague. And there was a sort of deal, an informal deal. We're not going to do anything bad to each other in Prague, but this is where our children are. And this is Prague. What we're saying is like, this is basically our Prague. We're going to create a neutral front, a neutral place where everything takes place that we don't want to share with our competitors. We don't want to share with anybody, but it's still a place that we trust enough because it's open source. So what we can do is we can say, okay, perfectly. We control that all the mechanisms are in place as should be. My own in-application thing works as I decide, so that's okay. And I can check it with all kinds of interesting protocols like PKI, DKIM and others. You can do controls about it. Anything basically is on a non-trust basis. So everything is transparent. And the good thing is because you put the user in control, you don't have any reliability, no responsibility for leakages, for a consent that is misappropriated. Basically, you have a system which is CNIL compatible, as far as I understood your talk today well, but it's taking it 2 steps further to make it completely all the separate parties.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Is that a sort of complementary add-on to this?
It's basically a more detailed version of what.
Is it a critical element that we must include at day one?
You don't need it on day one, but that's where we can go. That's what we can do with it.
And
There's more. In detail, that shows what some of the things that we can actually be done.
So that's an example of what we could develop in the detailed phase of this.
That's fair, right?
Yeah, it could be just a proof of concept, just work it out.
I'm just trying to work out whether I have to understand all of that in order to be able to explain it to other people, because I may need some further, I might need a longer tutorial from you on it, that's all. But, and does that piece work is that part of the commercial arrangement more than anything else, or is it?
No, that's, it's I guess it's adding more flesh on in terms of how flexible this thing is.
Yeah.
It's certainly, I would say it's certainly not necessary to go into that level of detail on the POC just to move this forward. And again, in the commercial conversation, I think we should try and keep it super simple so that we go through the exercise and just keep the numbers easy, nice round numbers, just to show it works for a POC. And
proof of concept, POC.
Yeah.
Just
there you go. There you go.
Page.
Just so that we know we've got the right organizations in place and the right conversations happening, and that moves us on. I think the sort of the complexity that this allows us to get into shows that it's future-proof. And we can start doing age ranging. We can do quite a lot of technical stuff if we can interrogate a token on an app. And literally the relying party just gets thumbs up and thumbs down, and all the interrogation is done on the data subject's device or the data subject's control.
So I wanted to keep it. I think one of the success factors for EU Consent 1 was we kept it simple and we weren't too ambitious. And technically, we only have 6 months left of EU Consent 2. So I think we will literally, in those 6 months, get to a point where hopefully we might say we've, to the same extent we had the PKI demonstration earlier between Lucidity and Yoti, that we've managed to perhaps demonstrate that this can work in practice and we've created all the parts. So I don't want anybody to be too intimidated, as I am, by these further complications to what should be a broadly simple system. But we haven't heard from you, Amari. So
just one quick question. Were you talking about open source or an open access?
Open source.
Open source.
You want to basically a GitHub repository where everything can be checked by anybody. And basically what you do is because you have a data layer which is open source completely, it is controlled by anybody on the net. And that serves for me the purpose, which is the biggest question of our time. Why should I trust you? Well, because you can check it. And anybody can check it. You can even do bounty stuff, you know, like if you find fault, we're going to reward you or whatever. But it makes it transparent. So it's not like a governmental organization that says, trust me because I'm the government. Or big tech tells you like, you know, I'm very convenient, so it takes the rest for granted. Basically what we say is anybody can check it. And your data are safe. And if you say it's not safe, it's only because you give consent for something you shouldn't, but then it's still revocable. So it gives you a lot of leeway without being ideological.
But have you,
Let's not go down the Ono rabbit hole too much further today. I'd just like to, just for concluding this thing, because you've run out of time, really. I mean,
I'll catch you afterwards.
perhaps Phil, Ian, you're probably the newest to this.
It just strikes me like, in terms of the business side, you're looking at
Telecoms, when you go abroad and you use other people's networks, how do the telecom operators do it? They, you know, you go with Vodafone, you go to or America and you use Mobitel, etc. But they charge each other, and they've got mechanisms in place. So certain Vodafone people can give it away free because you've got this plan. It's that sort of concept, isn't it? I think it's workable.
Yeah, and may I ask, one thing that is not relevant.
Okay, yeah, sure.
I know that there is, if you look at EINA's a window of 2 years. I know that the industry is working on something which is a year ahead. So if we want to be a player, a real big player, we need to be within a year able to prove that this is feasible. I know that from a lot of people like the gambling industry are waiting for something like this. They don't like governments. I don't know why. I have no opinion on the matter, but they need an option like this. The same for alcohol, the same for pornography. To give you one example, Safe Internet, which is a respectable organization, they are not allowed by European Commission to talk directly to porn industry, even though there's a lot of revenge porn there. So there's restrictions that we don't have because we are not the government. We can be far more flexible, not in ethics, but in ways of practical solutions. And I think if we are capable of making this happen within a year, we can be the industry standard.
Yeah. Last couple of comments and then we'll wrap up.
So what I like from the EU Consent 2.0 architecture proposal is that it's flexible and it's opening a way to how you implement that privacy, right? So CKP is a privacy enhancing technology. It relies on the more kind of sophisticated end of the spectrum in terms of properties, but also complexity. So on the kind of more PKI based credential system, you can still meet the privacy requirements in a simpler way. But what I like from this is that, you know, you can start with a simpler thing, and then as you prove, you know, that you are able to do this, you can migrate to the more sophisticated end of the spectrum. And on the CKP, there are two types of protocols, right? You got the interactive and non-interactive. But it's good to understand that this enables you to do both, because interactive basically would preclude any QR code, you know, to work. But on the non-interactive, it allows you to do that with CKP. So, yeah.
If you could start your final comment with the other reason I like EU Consent 2.0.
It was very quick. It was how do we allow user choice within the process? Because you talked about the number of central reliant parties. There's clearly some of the bigger ones are not going to want to have it. But let's just say there were 1,000 issuers. You're not going to want to have 1,000 conversations. They're going to have one or two. So how do smaller providers, ourselves as that, how do we participate then?
Yeah, so clearly you can't have a drop-down menu for 1,000 providers in your app to decide which one you want to use. How do we answer that question?
The simple answer is this. If you give business rules, relying party what you want, you have as much chance to get a small party as a big party involved. It's just about meeting your preferences.
So you might compete on a lower rack price. So you might get some visibility there, or you might win some direct contracts with relying parties.
How would the consumer, the user, know what was available?
The user doesn't have to know. It's just an infrastructure that is below the water. So the only thing the user knows is, I have my data here. I get a question to, you know, say that I'm over 18. I don't care how it's done, it's being done.
in first use, there's gotta be, somebody's gotta start. the
So
mechanism.
it's very much like today, you're going to an age restricted website and they're going to refer you to the people they've got a contract with, and that's what brings you into the ecosystem. But from that point forward, you might find you're not having to do that because in the background, the token works for the other relying party.
Yeah,
or
yeah,
you
no, I
relying party.
understand that. It was just the initial onboarding process.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to start somewhere, and how does the user might have a preference?
You
and
could just wake up one morning and think I need a Yoti and just go and get a Yoti and start off that way. But I think most people will come to it from the first point in time they need to prove their age online for one reason or another.
Yeah.
And then they will probably, and I've always thought the entry will be through the social media platforms that the kids all want to join as soon as they can, and that then gets them into the network. But of course, we're talking about age appropriate design. We might need some of you in postnatal wards handing out age verifications to 4-month-olds so that they've got their token ready to go when they start playing games online at the age of 2, which is what kids seem to do these days. So that was it really, just a brief introduction to see that we can sort of stand up tomorrow and say, this is what we've come up with, and announce it as a sort of EU consent 2.0. So I think the core community was already on board, but hopefully now a few others are happy with us going along those lines. So it's by no means a finished, polished product, but it's a concept we can talk about. And approved by yourself as the regulator in the room? And you bring your big stamp to say approved?
I've been working in academics and the public sector because I'm a slow thinker, you know. I cannot answer as business people who will get an agreement really quickly. The devil is in the details, and it seems like promising architecture. There are several concepts that I have not heard before and which are really interesting. For example, having a possibility for relying party to get a default age verification even though they have not contracted with anybody, because there is a standard which is really interesting in our opinion, because it will help having proper age verification on a large number of relying parties that need it. So this is a very good concept. Then a lot of course, I'm happy to hear that privacy is at the core of the system and that the user is a master of his data and consent, because this is what one of, well, very important principles in the GDPR and in today's approach to privacy. So this is really good. The only thing I see is that it's a complex architecture. So it needs to be worked very carefully, and it needs to be, as you said, there needs to be like maybe bug bounties and people who are making sure that it's robust, because the more pieces there are in the ecosystem, the more there may be vulnerability somewhere or some. So, but yeah, the concept is really interesting.
Brilliant. Well, that's definitely a high note to end on. So thank you all very much. We will close there. Glad we invited you. Thank you.
We're online.
Do it all open, transparent. I don't know, is there another meeting in here now? What? Are we done? Steve hangs around. Only Elizabeth Yiser is left.
As long as it's legally
I mean, as I said,